I'm pushing the record button, which I often forget to do. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Becky Mantle, and welcome to our Becoming Baby Friendly in Oklahoma webinar for May. And we have a different speaker today. So anyway, before I introduce our speaker and topic for today, just a couple of quick heads up. Those of you, if your hospital qualified for one of the education stipends for attending the summit back in March, just please respond to the emails from Sarah to confirm that you're going to utilize that so that we can ensure that we offer that to the first 10 hospitals. So I think she said she'd had about 6 out of the 10 so far that had confirmed. So if your hospital somehow is not going to make use of that, please let us know, and then we can offer it to the next hospital on the list, so we can hopefully, take full advantage of that that support from the State Health Department. And then also, as we're nearing the end of our fiscal year for our contracts with the Health Department, Sarah will be notifying all of our participating hospitals. We do a survey of just your kind of general progress on the 10 steps. We try to do that twice a year, and for sure by the end of the fiscal year. So you'll be getting a link online to go in and just give us a quick overview of how your hospital is progressing on each of the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding, those pieces, of course, of the Baby Friendly Initiative. So be on the lookout for that. And then without further ado, I'm going to go on and introduce our speaker and our topic. Petra Colindres is our Assistant Director for the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Resource Center. She is also manages our outpatient lactation clinic and oversees our Oklahoma Breastfeeding Hotline. So definitely a lot of good clinical experience there. And she's going to be addressing steps 3 and 10, which impact or which she's directly involved in the work that she does with both our hotline and outpatient lactation clinic. But anyway, steps 3 and 10, the importance of prenatal education and follow-up support. So I am going to get the screen out of the way and hand it over to Petra.
Perfect. Hi guys, this is my first webinar that I'm giving, so bear with me if there's any glitches or anything like that. I'm a little bit intimidated by some of the sidebar information up top. But so like Becky said, I am Petra Colindres. I am the Assistant Director here at the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Resource Center. And we thought it was appropriate for me to kind of talk a little bit about steps 3 and 10, just because I do have that direct correlation, luckily working with patients and mothers, and they actually become friends too, I like to say, in the outpatient clinic, and also to helping with support at the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Hotline. So things that we're really going to go over today are some of our objectives.
Or just do the arrows.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
So I already broke it, guys. There we go. All right. So our objectives today. So first of all, we do want to define the current baby-friendly criteria for steps 3 and 10, what they're really saying, what they're really looking for. Also, we do want to discuss the impact that steps 3 and 10 have on breastfeeding initiation and duration. Do these steps really matter? You guys probably already have your own thoughts on that. We'll kind of see what the evidence and what the research says in regards to steps 3 and 10. Also, we do want to talk a little bit about the available breastfeeding support options in Oklahoma. We're lucky and blessed that we do have a lot of options here in the state of Oklahoma, but what we have here, and then how to facilitate that to our mothers and our parents and our support people out here in the Oklahoma area. And then last but definitely not least, describing what mothers are wanting from education and support. There's a couple good some research on what parents are really looking for. And we'll kind of get a little bit, not too much in the weeds on that, but a little just kind of listening to what mothers are wanting from prenatal and postpartum support. And if you guys have any questions during any of this, please pepper in. I love a little bit more interactive and engagement. I'll probably be asking you guys some questions too. So feel free to unmute yourself or anything like that throughout the duration of the webinar. So this was, I think, talking about our steps 3 and 10 important. And I love that this is actually from a study with the impact in the United States of the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative on early infant health and breastfeeding outcomes. And so what it really said, it went through every, this survey did go through all the different steps. And what they found was of the 10 steps of the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, step 3, prenatal education, and step 10, postnatal breastfeeding support are the most difficult steps to implement. However, those steps have the potential to significantly impact maternal breastfeeding decisions. So in regards to step 3 and step 10, they really do have the potential to impact. And it doesn't say negatively or positively. It really can be either way. So if we have that correct response and support prenatally, we can really help a mother, kind of just if she's on the fence, make that decision to breastfeed. Or if we talk to her the wrong way, we could have that mother completely be turned off by it. So this steps 3 and step 10, and even with that continued support, helping a mother throughout the difficulties and the different relationships of breastfeeding, kind of navigating with that. I also thought it was really interesting too, the most difficult steps to implement. I did kind of want to ask you guys about that. Do you guys feel it's hard to implement step 3 and step 10 at your facility or in your areas? Any
You had it in the work set if anybody's typed in the chat box or anything. Yeah, I would just
Well, and I'll say, talking from our point of view, kind of since I do work at OU Physicians, I do think it's kind of difficult. And I almost think that steps 3 and step 10 are a little bit more difficult just because it's not just, it's more of that hive mind. You almost have to have that bit of buy-in, and it's not just in the hospital facility. As you guys probably know, step 3 and step 10 really talk about prenatal, really where the woman is or where the mother is getting her care, and then postnatally, where are they going for a pediatrician? Where are they going for that support afterward? There's just little that you can control that's not in the hospital setting. So I would have to agree that, kind of having those steps really implemented well and implemented at places where women can find that support easily can be a little bit more difficult. So going forward, I gave the analogy of a sandwich, sorry, it happens to be lunchtime. I hope you guys are eating something because this sandwich is just making me hungry currently. But if you kind of think about the initiative, I do think that step 3 and step 10 is really the bread or the crust that really holds the whole package together. All the different steps that we do within the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, steps 4 through 9, and the first 2 as well, really help build that momentum. And there's absolute importance in them. But step 3 and step 10, and I actually would even say that step 3 would be the bottom because step 3 would be that prenatal support, building that foundation, and step 10 would be the top of the crust, that continued support. And all of this needs to be fed to the mother in a appeasing, appetizing way for them to actually be willing and wanting and continuing with the breastfeeding. So I kind of use that analogy, and of course it just worked well because it was lunchtime. So. So what is step 3? So step 3 is inform all pregnant women about the benefits and management of breastfeeding. So what this requires is that baby-friendly hospital facilities inform all pregnant women about the benefits of breastfeeding, the importance of exclusive breastfeeding, and the management of breastfeeding, which does include feeding on demand, ensuring adequate milk and milk intake and milk supply from both mother and child, and reviewing proper positioning and attachment. Prenatal education techniques described as an effective in a WHO review include building a mother's confidence to breastfeed using group education sessions, discussing breastfeeding myths and inhibitions, and offering practical demonstrations during the prenatal setting. It also says that what WHO found was involving mother's social supporters, such as partners or grandmothers, as being very beneficial in the prenatal environment. So questions I kind of wanted to go over were, how do women make decisions over breastfeeding in that prenatal period? When do they? How are they making these decisions? And what method and education format is most effective to increase breastfeeding? We are lucky that there is a little bit of research out there, so we'll be kind of looking over what the literature says and what the literature does not say. So if any of you guys want to do some research down the line, maybe we can find some gaps for you. So first of all, let's talk about what factors are involved in infant feeding. So right now, research indicates that maternal decision-making related to infant feeding is, of course, multifactorial. It's not just one decision into it. So health of the infant, culture, social and family support, implications for the mother, and knowledge of infant feeding all really go into that multifaceted view of deciding how the family or the mother wants to feed her child. I underlined and italicized a couple of those because I do think that we do have a direct impact, especially prenatally, on giving that information so mothers are aware. Culture's a little bit sticky. I do think that down the line, the more education and support, this will eventually become cultural. But since cultural has so much more different parts to it, more support and more education get out there, hopefully this will actually be turned into more of a cultural thing. What the research says is often culture, family, and maternal confidence in the ability to provide breast milk have been shown to influence maternal decision making for infant feeding. And that's something that I see every day in the clinic. Absolutely, culture has an influence, but family, those core people that are in that mother's life have a huge impact on what's going on with mom, good or bad. It could go either way. And maternal confidence. And that's something that we really can impact in the prenatal setting, is giving the mother, empowering the mother, giving her those tools, and of course postpartum as well, to know that she's doing well. And something I do like to say, especially in a prenatal consult, is, you've spent 9, 10 months developing this perfect baby. Why wouldn't you have the perfect method of feeding them? And, just saying little messages like that, because, motherhood is a scary navigation, especially for a first-time mother. So just how can we build them and make them feel that they're able to do this task of breastfeeding? So who is breastfeeding? And with that, we'll kind of see who isn't breastfeeding, right? So breastfeeding demographics right now, they're married or they have a partner, so a partner that's very much in their lives. Highest initiation rates are white. They are almost 86%. Hispanic is almost as close as white, which is exciting, 85%, and Asian at 81%. And I'm rounding just for ease of myself. Right now, lowest is still, and probably doesn't come as a surprise, as African Americans are still the lowest initiation rates. Something to note, though, right now, white and Hispanic women are meeting the 2020 goals of breastfeeding initiation, which is about 82%. And Asian women are not that far behind. They're just 1% off. And still, African Americans do have the lowest rates of breastfeeding initiation and duration compared with all other racial and ethnic groups in the United States. Other things that we're also finding is that typically those that are breastfeeding are older and they're planned pregnancies, and that plan has very big correlation. They're usually college educated, and then they do typically have a higher income bracket. So with that being said, if these are the people that are breastfeeding who aren't breastfeeding, right? So mothers with lower rates of breastfeeding, they tend to be younger, they tend to be lower income and African American, and they also are typically unmarried, less educated, and they usually are participants in SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Program, or a part of WIC, Women's, Infants, and Children. Also kind of correlated, and this also kind of compacts, breastfeeding and pregnancy and birthing factors. They're typically overweight or obese before pregnancy, and they're more likely to report that their pregnancy was unintended. So having a clear view of who is breastfeeding and who's not can kind of also shape how you kind of reach these different people, really depending on who you're seeing in your clinics or in your support groups or wherever you're giving education. I also took this picture because I was like, man, I want to see what it looks like when I Google breastfeeding. And I think we've seen this picture before at one of our conferences, but I think one of our symposiums not too long ago, we saw a picture like that. But it was about 3 years ago that we used to do a simple Google search for images of breastfeeding, and 3 years ago it was all white people. And yet here it is 3 years later, and the imagery doesn't change. I will say I think we got an Asian. They're making the top 8 right at the bottom. But, really our stereotypes are being implicated and pushed more, even just in a simple Google search. This tells people, if I was going to, say I was an African American woman, I Google, breastfeeding, I don't see anything in those pictures that remind me of myself. So what does that reinforce for myself is that African American women don't breastfeed. And it's, I hope that we do push the stereotype, because that's, as we all know, that's not true. So how many women want to breastfeed? Let's talk about that. So what the research tells us is there's the Childbirth Connection study, which if you guys haven't seen it, they're a great website. They do studies every so often. But they in 2013, they partners with Lamaze International, and it was an entire study about maternal perceptions of the entire pregnancy and birth experiences. They surveyed about almost 1,600 women. They were ethnically, racially, and socioeconomically diverse, and they represented all of America. So I thought this was a great study to kind of look at, like, so who is wanting to breastfeed and what does that look like right now? So out of these women prior to birth now, and that's kind of the distinctions prior and postpartum, prior to birth, 54% of mothers were intending to breastfeed exclusively, and 27 of these women wanted to use formula and breastfeed. And if I look at those numbers and add them up, that actually kind of makes sense too, because typically initiation rates, kind of across the board are about 80%, just depending on what state you're looking at. However, 1 week postpartum, 50% were breastfeeding. So again, looking at, this is why baby-friendly hospital is so important. Absolutely, those small steps that we do in the middle, as we all know, they're not small, but those couple of steps that we do in the hospital really do have an impact on helping support these decisions of the 54 and 27% of women who this is what they desired. So this was across America, but what is it? What is going on in Oklahoma here specifically? So here in Oklahoma, we're almost at 80% initiation rate. That's 79, but I'm gonna round that up. We're at 80% initiation. Exclusively breastfeeding at 3 months, we're at 41%. EBF at 6 months, we're at 21%, and any breastfeeding at 6 months is 47. So they kind of actually are very similar to these 2013 studies. But again, that being said, if we did this study here again in a couple years, I'm sure those numbers would go up. So, in the Midwest, sometimes we're a little bit behind. So we will get there though. So this is a great study talking about why women chose to breastfeed, because I was kind of looking at what are the factors that really implement women to choose formula feeding or breastfeeding, and how can we help these mothers prenatally make these decisions. So a research study I found was the mother's beliefs, attitudes, and decision making related to infant feeding choices. So it was a group of both breastfeeding mothers, in formula and breastfeeding mothers, and formula feeding mothers, and just kind of asking them as a qualitative study why they chose to do what they do, right? So why do women choose to breastfeed? And these were from the breastfeeding mothers. So health of the infant was the primary motivator for why women chose to breastfeed. Maternal benefits were also mentioned quite frequently, which I think is actually interesting because you'll see maternal benefits for both the women that choose to breastfeed as well as for the women that actually chose to formula feed. But they do differ. So maternal benefits that were noted for breastfeeding mothers was weight loss, more effective uterine involution, which I actually thought was crazy that they mentioned that, but I think that's great. Maternal-infant bonding and cost effectiveness. So those were typically the reasons why mothers chose to actually breastfeed. Also, too, they were more likely to seek out information in regards to infant feeding. So just pulling a quote from from the study, my mom said she had to know everything there was to know about babies when I was pregnant. I don't know how many baby books I read or how many internet sites I visited. I asked everyone I knew how they fed their baby. I was told everything from breastfeeding is hard and it hurts to breastfeeding is so easy. But everybody told me it was better for the baby. I couldn't find anything that said formula was better, so ... And that's kind of where that kind of left off. But I thought it was interesting that mothers are looking for this information, but a lot of times too, it's not necessarily readily available. They have to seek it out themselves. So it's something that's absolutely something we can work with in regards to step 3 is where they're at, in their doctor's offices, things like that. Making it easy to find that information and making it so it's easily accessible and interesting and they want to read it. So any questions thus far kind of in the middle of this webinar? As I take a swig of water real quickly.
Type anything and see it show up.
No, we're good. Okay.
The only comment I would make is where are mothers, if they have to seek out the information, where are they getting it from? And it's not necessarily accurate information.
Yeah, and there's and there's honestly there's no where they're going. We'll kind of talk about it a little bit further on. There's no research on where they're going. But again, even if you just take away that little snippet I just read, baby books, internet sites, that's where they're getting their information. I will say, take this for what it is, but in this actual study, they found that the mothers that actually sought out the information, instead of just being given the information at their doctor's offices, had a longer duration. But I also kind of think that a lot of that maternal confidence has to play and that maternal interest has to come into play. Right. Well, now I know why women are choosing to breastfeed, but why are women choosing to formula feed? So women are choosing to formula feed. The biggest reason was perception, or one of the bigger reasons. That was just how an infant should be fed. So they frequently cannot identify a reason why they chose to bottle feed, except for the fact that that's just how they thought. That's what they see. That's what they've always saw. They never even crossed their mind that they could do something differently other than bottle feed or formula feed their kiddos. Again, maternal benefits were mentioned, but again, these are different benefits that were mentioned. So formula feeding mothers cited that benefits were convenience, not being tied down to the infant, and fear of pain associated with breastfeeding. And again, I think that was kind of different, interesting too. The not being tied down, the convenience and pain. As we all know, working in the field, breastfeeding shouldn't hurt. So that's one that easily could be dispelled, especially early on in a pregnancy. And even convenience. I think maybe at first it's a little bit more work to put into breastfeeding, depending, maybe not. But over time, as we all know, there is a huge convenience factor with breastfeeding. You don't have to bring bottles and bags and sterile water and formula. So even just kind of looking at what they're citing as reasons to formula feed, could these be reasons or areas that we could talk to people prenatally and kind of meeting them where we're at and kind of tell them, well, that's true, but giving them the other side of the story. Again, women that are choosing to formula feed were more likely to not seek information re-infant feeding, and they had a lack of awareness of the risks to formula feeding. So none of the mothers seemed aware of the risks associated with their own infant or their own health or their infant's health related to formula feeding. And that makes sense. If you're not going to seek out information, you would probably have a lack of awareness. Also, too, one of the reasons they cited is that they felt like they had their pediatrician or pediatric encouragement that formula feeding was just as healthy for the infant. Pediatricians know best. So if my pediatrician said it was fine, why bother and put myself through that hassle? So kind of dragging, or one of the snippets from one of the mothers in the study is, I got a lot of pamphlets and stuff from the doctor's office, but I never got around to reading any of it. I mean, really, what's there to know? Today you can just go on to the store and buy the formula already in the bottles. You just take off the cap and feed the baby. It's not like the way my grandmother tells it, where you had to make the formula and sterilize the bottles. So I kind of thought that was an interesting snippet of information, just because you could, even between the women who chose to breastfeed and women who chose to formula feed, just the difference in perception and kind of that motivation there. So have any of you all kind of dealt with that in any of your settings, kind of dealt with a mom who was a little bit more resistant like that? Well, and yeah, it's a quiet day today. Well, and, it's kind of interesting too, because from as a lactation consultant but also a dietitian, I think it's interesting to have because I put value. It's hard not to put your own personal opinion, and you put value because this is what you do for a living. But there are those women out there who just don't think it's that important. So again, we'll kind of talk about how, and maybe discuss how are the best ways to kind of overcome a little bit of that resistance.
I have one that, this is Becky here. So I think one comment in the perception that breastfeeding is painful, well, there's actually truth to that. And so we have to be careful that we don't make it sound like breastfeeding is never, ever going to be painful, but that mothers need to understand if they are experiencing pain, that's a red flag, and we need to get that assessed and address it. And so it's not that you have to suffer through 6 weeks of painful breastfeeding to get to the glory land or something.
Right. just 6 weeks to get through it.
Yeah. But also just to help them be realistic and know that, if there is pain, let's look at that and see what's going on.
And that ties in nicely with further on in the webinar, so you guys wait for that. So why do women choose? So these women also asked why they didn't choose the opposite. So for breastfeeding women, they were asked why they didn't choose to formula feed, and for formula feeding women, they chose why didn't they choose to breastfeed. So for breastfeeding women, why they didn't choose to formula feed, typically they just gave some short answers. There wasn't really a lot of, it was just kind of almost flippant in the responses. And one of the biggest responses was their need to be close and bond to their infant. So an example of why didn't they choose to formula feed? Well, breastfeeding is healthier. Like that would be an example, and really wasn't a big deal for them to not formula feed. On the other side, though, for formula feeding women, why didn't they choose to breastfeed? For them, there was longer answers, there was more justification, and their biggest concern was being tied down, or their perception of what being tied down is. So a lot of the mothers, they actually, what they've noticed is their tone was more aggressive and in some instances defensive. There was a sense that they were trying to convince the interviewer of the validity of their decision, and that the mothers included statements as, you have to see this from my point of view, you have to understand that breastfeeding just didn't fit in within my life or my lifestyle. And so one of the quotes I grabbed is, from a mother, where she was saying, you have to understand, I am a person too. I just can't drop whatever I'm doing to go feed a baby, especially when there are other people around who can do it. I don't mean I'd ever let him go hungry. Of course I would feed him, but I think the father should share the responsibility too. I mean, the baby isn't going to be happy if the mother isn't happy. Babies can sense things like that. So, and that also brings up too, how do you make women not feel defensive, or that their choice in formula feeding is wrong? Have any of you guys had any experience with any of that? And something I like to say too in regards to this, it's all about how you approach the subject. As we all know, motherhood in general is just ripe with, are you doing things right or wrong? And everyone has their own opinion. So in my opinion, and you'll find out here in a second, there's really just not any research on how the best approach, but it does come with how you're approaching the subject and how you're relating to the individual. Becky, would you have anything to say to that? Or?
Well, I think just, like they said, I'm a person too, and it's not all just about the baby, but giving Heather an opportunity to express any concerns or questions that she has, and validating those. In a lot of the trainings that I do, and some of y'all have probably been to them, we talk about the 3-step counseling, and that just even asking an open-ended question so that they can share. If the big concern is, well, I hear it's really painful, and I'm just, I'm not gonna, I don't think I can tolerate that. Well, then being able to, yes, it can be painful. Let's talk about, why that might happen and what we would do about that. But yeah, I think our society's done a good job of pitting mothers against each other, whether it has to do with infant feeding or natural childbirth, or whatever. And so that's even a bigger issue than just the choice of breastfeeding versus formula feeding. So, which saddens me.
It's different nowadays, that's for sure. So moving on, does prenatal education make a difference? And I have a big, huge yes there. So what we have found is that health of the infant is a powerful motivator, and the education of the entire family is greater than the individual. So when you're doing this prenatal education, and this is something that I was thinking, man, we really need to drive this home to the powers that be, but we need to get the family there. You got to get the support system there. I can't tell you how many times I have a prenatal consult, and sometimes the father's there, or the grandmother, which is great, but a lot of the time, I'd say 50% of the time it is just the individual. And that's, honestly, that's not even fair too, because it's almost saying, like, oh, the whole feeding thing is just on the mom. And we all know, those that do this, that it's not on the mom. Dads, or partners, or whatever that looks like, that support person has a huge role. And it can be grandmothers, it can be grandfathers. So really getting everyone who's going to be involved, directly involved in the process of infant feeding and what this would look like. So then we get into the who, the when, and the how, or I think the when, who, and how, but I was close. So when should we be giving this education prenatally? So evidence does show that prenatal interventions alone, or in combination with interpartum and or postpartum support, can increase breastfeeding initiation, duration, and exclusivity. However, the when is a little, yes, we know prenatally it helps, but we don't know when prenatally, if that makes sense. So we don't know if prior to conception is the best time to do it, the first, second, or third trimester, but we do know in the systematic review for step 3 is that prenatal consultations or interventions do have a direct impact on the initiation, duration, and exclusivity. Then it comes to the point is who should be giving. Does it have to be the OB-GYN? Should it be the LPNs? Does it have to be an IBCLC? So in this systematic review, they looked over several different ways that prenatal education was given, and it was from a whole range of people who are knowledgeable. So we had some IBCLCs. We had one that was a researcher, which I thought that was great. We had a researcher giving some prenatal breastfeeding education, peer counselors, medical providers. We even had some dads just giving some support in some of the dad groups that they were looking at. So when it came to the WHO, that wasn't as important as long as the intervention was prenatally and had some of the other components that we'll talk about. So what are the other components? The other components are the how. So prenatal education needs to be both informational and interpersonal support. That was the biggest, that probably the how was the biggest one to really take away. We need to have that education, we absolutely do, but we need to have that interpersonal support as well. So we can't just, so one of the systematic review was a webinar or it was a online education. That's great. Online education is great and probably really easily accessible for a lot of women. But without that interpersonal support, it was found to not be nearly as effective. And of course, too, with the how, it does need to include the woman's family. So whatever her support system looked like, maybe her family is church family or family, depending if she's close to her family or not, or maybe just friends. They need to be included to really help support the mom in her decisions. So then we talked a little bit about the delivery method. And like I mentioned, this review was looking at a whole bunch of different methods. And if any of you guys have any knowledge or any background in public health, as we all know, there's not one size fits all. So probably the more options out there available for people, the better, because everyone learns differently or is more receptive differently. So, I guess again, there's a lot of different ways to deliver this information. So absolutely classes, and they did afternoon, evening, weekends, and dads only, which I love that they were doing dads only classes. They did have online education, videos, one-on-one prenatal education and clinic, home visits, and we had the example of Children First Healthy Start, and this systematic review, they weren't looking necessarily at that, but again, this is the options we have here in Oklahoma. And then of course, written materials were provided. So I wanted to kind of give some pictures. So this is a breastfeeding class, and what I loved about this picture in particular was the fact that they have the support people there. So we had some fathers, we have a grandmother in the picture, and again, really getting that support. And I wish that I could say that whenever I do my prenatal consults, this is what they look like every single time. And I'm sure that you guys wish you could say that too if you guys are doing anything prenatally. But this would be like the ideal, and again, sometimes working with what you're given. Then I also wanted to show, so, are people doing any breastfeeding online? And so this is a breastfeeding class I actually found from a hospital, not locally. So any hospitals doing any breastfeeding education locally? I was kind of wondering that. Or online, sorry, that's online, not locally. But does anyone have anything like that? No, doesn't look like it. But I thought that's yeah. I thought that this was great that they were kind of offering, some education online. Class prerequisite was internet. And again, too, there's a lot of different other places that women can get breastfeeding information. This was just one that was free from a hospital that I thought was just great. So I also wanted to talk a little bit too is the how is, because we want to obviously get this prenatally that has a direct relationship with the OB-GYNs that they're getting care from. So how do OB-GYNs, how can they fit this into their breastfeeding schedule with everything else they need to discuss, prenatally in the maybe 5 to 10 minutes that they have with women? So since we have started doing some prenatal consults here at OU Physician as part of protocol, which I'm really excited about, I kind of wanted to get some OB-GYNs perspectives and kind of find from them, is this working? What do you like? What do you not like? So this is Dr. Kate Arnold, and she is the OB-GYN here at OU Physicians. So how she fits into her busy schedule, I counsel about the importance during our prenatal visits, but am weak at troubleshooting and send them to the breastfeeding clinic for that. So it seems that throughout her, her different visits, she tries to counsel a little bit about the importance of why breastfeeding is important, but in regards to the how, that's when she will send them over to the breastfeeding clinic. And I will say OU Physicians is very blessed to have a on-the-spot breastfeeding clinic. What is the best way to provide support? Sending them to the breastfeeding clinic. So that's the best way she's found for support. And then are patients receptive? And she said patients are very receptive. And I love that she italicized and underlined herself. So I was like, okay. So, we sometimes worry, are we going to be forcing patients into, breastfeeding, which none of us want to do or need to do. And I think that even if you look at our Oklahoma's initiation rates at 80%, the majority of women are wanting to breastfeed and want that education. So yes, and kind of stands to reason that they would be very receptive because this is the information they're wanting to understand. I also got some information from Dr. Flint, who's another OB-GYN at OU Physicians. So how she fits into her busy schedule is I typically ask about it when discussing contraception in the second trimester, which I thought was very logical. I was like, yeah, contraception, it might have an effect on breastfeeding, so she usually fits it in at that point, which makes sense. What is the best way to provide support is to be able to refer them to the lactation for support, and are patients receptive? And she did find yes. So, again, to do OB-GYN kind of drive the conversation, I do think that they do, and research would also support that as well, that healthcare providers, but it does, kind of help start that conversation and sort of start that thought process. But it doesn't have to be the OB-GYN that's sitting there and talking. Again, we want their support, her or him. But again, if they don't have the time to fit into their schedule to have that support, and then even have that follow up, oh, did you see the lactation consultant? Or, oh, did you go to the class? How do you think it is? How do you think, did you learn anything? Do you have any questions? That's really where the OB-GYN can really play a role. So are there any kind of questions about step 3 before we get on to step 10? All right. Yeah, and or maybe any examples of how you guys are currently doing step 3 at your facilities? Or are you guys doing any, step 3 at all? I feel like Bueller. Well, we'll just kind of move on then to step 10 then really quickly. So what does step 10 say? Yeah. So foster the establishment of breastfeeding support groups and refer mothers to them on discharge from the hospital center. So who will need support on their, what does step 10 take? Sorry. Before a mother leaves the maternity facility, she needs to be able to feed her baby, understand the importance of exclusive breastfeeding the first 6 months and continue breastfeeding after the introduction of complementary foods to 2 years and beyond, be able to recognize that feeding is going well. So therefore, that would kind of mean then she would also probably be able to recognize when feeding is not going well. And then find out where to get ongoing support that she needs. And so what that being said, so who will need that support, right? So who will need the support will be first-time breastfeeding mothers, mothers with multiple demands, which could be with everybody in this group probably, but multiple gestation, more than one child, going back to work, etc. So anything like that would fall into that category. Mothers with difficulty feeding their infants, mothers who are isolated. Again, too, that might not be as common here in Oklahoma, but it kind of also depends where you're at. Probably Oklahoma City, you might be a little bit more isolated because we're a little bit more urban than, maybe Guymon or something like that, or, somewhere more rural. So kind of knowing where the isolation ends. And I would say too, sometimes having family members are great, and sometimes, depending on the family members, it could also be a barrier. Mothers who are receiving conflicting advice, and then also mothers or infants with a health problem, or both sometimes, because we know they sometimes go together. So I kind of laugh too, because if you look at these 6 steps, really, I can think of very rare mothers who don't have at least one of these situations apply to them. So really, in short, all mothers need support. I mean, you might have the diamond in the rough that don't have any of these 6, but I think the majority of mothers, somewhere, somehow, it's one of these would fall into them, if not multiple of them. So what does support look like? So there's many different ways to support breastfeeding postpartum. So we do have health services. So with that would be like the breastfeeding hotline with lactations on call, or outpatient support or anything like that. So that would be kind of one of our first things we think about. But there's more things than that to just be supporting breastfeeding postpartum. So family and friends, especially if they have breastfed before or have any knowledge with breastfeeding, can be a really big support in the postpartum era. Mother-to-mother support groups, which those are really picking up nowadays, and I think that's great because, as like I said, building up mothers versus we need to build up mothers, especially for the breastfeeding. Community-based peer counselors, baby-friendly pediatricians and family MDs. So I put baby-friendly in parentheses because there is a slight movement for that designation in pediatric offices and family doctor offices. I don't think we have any locally or in Oklahoma, but again, even if a pediatrician or family doctor is encouraging and slightly knowledgeable, that is going to go a long way in supporting that breastfeeding relationship. And then technological support. So that can be anything from Facebook and going to all these different Facebook groups to all the different apps that they have nowadays to kind of click on and ask for breastfeeding questions. So which way is the best? Unfortunately, I can't tell you. So there's no research right now on how parents are getting support and how or which one's the most effective. So, my gut would probably say a lot more parents are going to more technological support just because that's the way our society is right now. But again, no research yet saying that my gut is right. So time will tell on that one. So does breastfeeding support make a difference? And this is a huge yes, and I try to make it bigger because it actually probably is a little bit, I mean, it's just as important, but it's probably a little bit more, has more of an impact on the mother, just especially with that duration piece. So step 10, and this is from the Impact of the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative on breastfeeding and child health outcomes, a systematic review. But what they said is step 10 appears to be key for long-term sustainability of the short-term breastfeeding gains obtained as a result of the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative efforts focusing solely in maternity facilities. And that makes a whole bunch of sense to me, because if we do everything right in the hospital, which is fabulous, it's what we want with the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative, I mean, things can go great in the hospital, and the minute they get home, everything just falls apart. And, that makes sense because sometimes moms are only there for 24 hours, so the milk might not even have come in at that point. So really step 10 is that kind of even that bridge from the maternity ward until the family, into the actual lifestyle. I would love to see Baby Friendly down the line really even kind of push on this, like how do we really build a culture of support, but maybe that'll be down the line. But it really is a very big difference in helping support these women and helping them where they need to go or where they want to go. So talking about step 10, what do we have here in Oklahoma? I think we are really, really blessed to have quite a bit of support here in Oklahoma. So like we mentioned, we have the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Hotline. We do have several outpatient breastfeeding clinics. So as you know, I work here at OU Physicians, but we have several across Oklahoma City and across the Oklahoma area, Tulsa, Lawton. I was thinking it was Lawton. Yep, Lawton. So a lot of the more probably major cities have a lot of outpatient breastfeeding clinics. And of course, too, from maybe the more rural areas, we have the WIC and breastfeeding peer counselors. So thank goodness for WIC, because they're really popping in rurally wherever we need that support.
No, unfortunately, the breastfeeding peer counselors aren't statewide yet.
That's true. That's true.
So we do have gaps in the rural areas
so,
as far as access. Yeah.
So we still have a little bit more to work on, but slowly but surely. We also do have Parent Pro and Healthy Start, which those are the groups that come into the homes. And then breastfeeding support groups. So even thinking locally, like we have the Baby Cafe. We have, I know Integris has their own milk bar right now, and there's Milk Moms over, kind of locally in the area. We also have some groups in Tulsa that I've heard about. So there's a lot of breastfeeding support groups that are popping up, which is just fabulous because this is the support that women need. And then local Facebook groups. So sometimes that's a pro and a con, just occurs depending, but I can think of several Facebook groups already that help support women and helping them get the what they need to be successful. So as I kind of conclude step 3 and step 10, I thought I'd put this funny. It's almost Mother's Day anyway, but Mother Inc. Human Resources. So one vacation day a year, that's all I get, and we call it Mother's Day, but technically you still have to work. And I thought that was actually a great transition because it kind of is. It's truthful and kind of talking about what mothers want to hear for support, both prenatally and postpartum. So this was just a dry sense of humor of saying that, like, honest support. Let's be honest, there's no off days when you're a mother. So that being said, what do mothers really want to hear whenever they're talking about breastfeeding? So this is a great study I found called "What Do Women Really Want? Lessons for Breastfeeding Promotion." So one of the things mothers do want to hear, and I didn't talk about everything because I just had more interesting things and more pertinent things for us today, was do not focus only on the health impact of breastfeeding. So stronger emphasis on immediate, tangible hooks for the mother, such as convenience, lower cost, ease, and closeness, and not just a health benefit. So I thought it was interesting that this study said that, because if you remember previously in the webinar, is health benefit was one of the main motivators, but I don't think that that main motivator actually correlates to long-term breastfeeding. So what I mean about that is just if you think something is healthy, that doesn't make it easy. So we need something that is an immediate hook that make mothers think, okay, right now I might not be, enjoying it, or this might not be what I was envisioning, but this is why I'm doing it. So convenience could be one of those things. It really is more convenient, or it really is easy, or I really am feeling closer to my baby. So again, thinking of those, in the second tangible hooks, I think will really help mothers with their stronger emphasis on breastfeeding. So from the study, a quote was, "Breastfeeding is about so much more than health. It's about cuddles and closeness and bonding. It saves time, costs nothing, and you can never forget to take it out with you, which I laugh at that because I forget things all the time. Why don't we emphasize these things more? So yes, is health important for your baby? Absolutely. No one wants a healthy baby, or everyone wants a healthy baby. They don't want a sick baby. But there's other things for breastfeeding that moms want to hear about why breastfeeding is beneficial. What else do moms want to hear? They want to take it a day at a time, that every feed makes a difference, that every drop matters, and they need to fit within women's lives. So we need to fit breastfeeding to where women are at right now. So the quote I found is, if you really want to boost breastfeeding, you have to abandon this black or white stance, and it's really a spectrum. And I kind of thought that was interesting, but also important, because there's some research to support this. There is this all or nothing mentality with breastfeeding. Oh, I gave formula once, so what's the point now? I've ruined it. And I do see that a lot with my families, and I think those might be the families that actually need more support, because breastfeeding's not going well for them. So there might be a mother who comes to my clinic who maybe doesn't have the greatest supply, but you know what? We'll sit there and figure out, hey, you're meeting 75% of your kiddo's needs with your breastfeeding. When a woman hears that instead of this black or white stance, they are more empowered and they feel that this actually is making a difference. So fitting it where they are, yes, we want every mother to exclusively breastfeed for 6 months. But we also want to abandon this black or white stance as well, because it's not all or nothing. We know that every little bit of breast milk does make a difference in a child's life and a mother's life too. So tell us the truth. What else do mothers want to hear? It can be challenging, and this is really why I chose that cartoon in the beginning. So kind of what Becky was talking about before. Can breastfeeding be painful? It can be. Let's talk about it, right? We need to have more realistic information out there, and we need information on how to deal with difficulties. We also do need to educate the fathers, families, friends, and society. So a quote from this study was, breastfeeding is a wonderful experience. Perhaps that is true, but is not the whole picture. When I found it difficult, I felt like a complete failure and embarrassed and guilty that I felt that way. And the end of this made me feel, as a clinician, because we do talk about, we might even overplay the benefits and how wonderful breastfeeding is, and it is, but it can be difficult. All of us that have breastfed have probably gone through an experience where it was a little bit not the best time. And we don't need to have a mother feel embarrassed and guilty or a failure because it's not working out how she was told. So telling women the truth, telling that it can be a bit challenging, and then telling them, but if you're experiencing these challenges, where can you go for help and more support? Really, that's what moms want to hear. And I could even say I think I personally am failing in this area and probably shouldn't be. I mean, things can be rosy, but things can also be challenging, and that's just motherhood in general. And last part I kind of wrote about is, what do mothers want to hear? Again, this went through a couple more things that I put on these slides, but breastfeeding and education support need to target a wider audience. So no small task there, right, guys? But we need to educate the public as to the importance and need, make breastfeeding more visible, highlight legal protection that exists, which I feel we do really good here in the state of Oklahoma. We have those breastfeeding cards and everything. Advertising breastfeeding on TV ads as much as formula, which I wish we could do. Maybe someday we can be doing this. Using celebrities as much as possible, and educate children and youth. So one mother said, I know why breastfeeding is important. My partner knows why breastfeeding is important. But it's very difficult to put up with others' ignorant views. So just because family members or the nuclear family might understand why it's important, they still do not get, maybe did not get those negative looks or perceptions, and getting everyone on board. That's really what mothers want to hear. So any thoughts to any of this as we kind of end our webinar today? Any questions? Are really quiet.
I have a comment. I think the one about using celebrities is interesting. I have a little video I play in trainings. This is just kind of a thing that celebrity about breastfeeding. But I wonder sometimes if that can even backfire. If others think that well, of course, if I was rich and famous and I had a nanny and I had all the money in the world and I could pay for that's not.
Oh, yeah, can I help you?
So um, I, I wonder how we can once again make breastfeeding more realistic and show moms, look like them and that they can identify with that are successful with breastfeeding. Anyway.
makes the
More,
point.
yeah.
But
More
both
work,
sides.
more work today.
Right. Well, as we kind of end our webinar, so again, kind of reiterating some of our upcoming events here at the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Resource Center. So our next baby-friendly webinar will be the 27th of June, so it's a little bit of a different time.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's the last Wednesday of the month, and we've had some information about some possible changes to the 10 steps from the World Health Organization. So Trish McEnroe, who's the executive director of Baby Friendly USA, we actually have her scheduled to present to y'all that day, so that'll be a really biggie for everybody to tune in for, and we'll see what we're hearing from our National Baby Friendly organization about any future changes.
And then also we do have our OK, LCA, US LCA, and OBRC will be part of it too, regional conference coming up. So we'll be here in Oklahoma City at the Samus Education Center. It's pretty much going to be an all-day thing on Friday, June 8th. Food will be provided, guys, so letting you know that. But there is a cost to it. I believe we don't have it's not early bird anymore. It's going to be general registration, which I want to say is in the $100-ish, $130 range. So there will be SERPs available, so we do hope that you guys can attend. I'm really excited about it. And our own Becky Mantle will be talking a little bit too. And then for the Baby Friendly OK webinar theme for fiscal year 2019 will be the evidence for the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding. So we'll be going through.
Yeah, so the World Health Organization, that's another big publication they came out with recently, updating and reviewing more current research in support of the 10 steps and updating the evidence for that. So we thought that would be a kind of a fun approach for the webinars throughout the year. It won't just focus on that. We'll have a couple others we intersperse in there, but we'll generally try to go through each of the 10 steps or a couple of the steps together and just make sure we understand why we're doing this, and why these 10 steps, why they are, and why we need to work to implement them.
Well, we're excited. So I hope you guys are excited for fiscal year 2019. Thank you guys so much for staying on. We, as always, we'll post this on our YouTube link later for anyone who is wanting to listen. And, if you have any questions, feel free to contact Becky or I. So, it's a couple minutes before 1. So thanks, guys, for listening.
Thank you. Thanks.
Just close